I prayed in faith for God to save my baby, and He didn't. And for a long time, I couldn't understand why. I knew that God was good. I still know that God is so good. But I couldn't understand why God would give my husband and I this child that we felt He promised us, and then take that child from us before it ever got a chance to see this world. And I couldn't wrap my head around how God, who I knew loved me, could allow me to lose a child that I loved and wanted so dearly, and that I truly felt was a promise of the Lord's. But what I couldn't see in that moment, and I could never understand at that time, was that God was going to have His hand upon my pregnancy in a way that He would use that loss to save my own life. Because there was something happening in my body that would have cost me my life if I would have carried that child to birth. And as much as it hurts me, and it still hurts me so much, if I didn't lose that child, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. There's a really good chance that I wouldn't be here talking to you today. For nearly the first year, I looked back and I saw my miscarriage as the tragedy that it was. But after something happened that revealed to me how dire the ticking time bomb was that was within me, it was then that I realized that God's hand was moving all along. And it's not that losing my child was good. Oh Lord, I wish that child was here with me. Every day I think about her and what she would be doing and who she would be like more, my husband or myself, and things we would have been able to teach her about God and the world. And it's not because the pain wasn't real. I suffered so much heartbreak after that loss, and that year it just completely changed me as a person, and I still carry that grief with me. And I genuinely know that we don't just slap a Bible verse over our pain and call it good. But I'm sharing this story with you today so that you can really understand and truly grasp that God often does something bigger, something miraculous in the deepest, darkest part of our lives and circumstances for our good. And I really do truly believe that. And sometimes when we can't see it, we beg God, why are you doing this, God? Why do I have to go through this? And somewhere beyond what we can see in the natural, He's already written the answer. He already has it all figured out for us. This is the story of the child that I never got to hold, and the prayer that wasn't answered, how I so wanted it to be answered, and how one of the greatest heartbreaks of my life ultimately became the reason that I'm still alive. Before I tell you how losing my baby saved my life, I want to tell you a little bit about who I was before I finally became pregnant after a long period of infertility. Because at that point in my life, I had absolutely no idea what was coming. I knew that God was preparing me, it felt like, for something big. He was having me draw lines in the sand, having me protect my spirit, having me rely, exclusively on Him to get through periods of pain and depression and loneliness and feeling like I wasn't being seen. And He was building in me a reliance on Him, truly as a child relies on their father. But I didn't know at that time that there was something big happening in my body, you know. I didn't know that things were progressing so quickly in my health towards a very critical place. I didn't have any of that information at that time. I didn't know that my life could potentially be in danger, and I certainly did not know that one of the most joyous things that could happen to me would soon turn into heartbreak, but would also be the very thing that saved my life. All I knew at that time and the years leading up to that time was that I had a wonderful husband who loved me, who treated me more respectfully and with more care than anyone else had in my entire life. And I was so grateful to God that He brought him into my life. And, I was enjoying, making memories with him and building a relationship with him around God and just, feeling safe for once in my life, to really feel safe emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically with another man, and enjoying our beautiful wedding when we got married in September of 2019. And, the season was one of great happiness in 2019. And then, of course, COVID hit a couple months later. But, we got our wedding in before that happened. We went to Maui, enjoyed a beautiful honeymoon, and we really just were enjoying life. Now, before we talk about me finding out that I was going to have a child and how wonderful that was, and then the time that I had being pregnant with what I felt like was a miracle child, and then the heartbreak, and then of course how that all tied back to save my life, I do want to insert something here. My husband and I have had a very long and very difficult infertility journey. We have a previous miscarriage and then several years of infertility. Just the hardest battle that I have ever been through physically on my own was that infertility journey. And I will be making a separate video to go over to that, but just know that it was so difficult on my spirit. The test, over and over, the wondering, the waiting, the holding on for hope and the faith, and the trial along with that infertility journey was just brutal. And that was, of course, before we found out about this miracle pregnancy. We have went through this long, very difficult journey together, my husband and I. There's something that happens when you find out that you're pregnant. Long before anyone else can see that child, you can. You can imagine who they're going to be. You imagine holding them. You imagine their little face. You imagine birthdays and Christmas and ordinary moments and first words and first steps. An entire lifetime can begin forming inside your heart. Well, before you even hold your child in your arms. And those of you who are parents, you know exactly what I mean. You begin to envision their whole future. You see their laughs and their first words and night times together, the middle of the night taking care of them, and all the excitement, imagining their birth, and their first a few months home from the hospital, and you experiencing parenthood with your spouse, which is such a special thing. The love that you guys get to experience as you take care of a child together, and all the joys that come into imagining being a new parent. You begin to think about right away when you get a positive pregnancy test. So my husband and I were naturally so thrilled, and we didn't wait but a couple of weeks, and then we had a party with my family to announce the news. We did a special What Will You Find Under the Sea theme. We even did a little gender reveal because we had got one of those tests where you can find out the gender early through blood. And so we did this whole Pirates Under the Sea special thing. Then seemingly out of nowhere, just, 2 weeks, a couple weeks later, I went to my OBGYN appointment, and the doctor did an ultrasound and told me that, things were looking unusual and there was some bleeding and some things that looked like there could be a threat to the baby, and we were told to go back at home and wait a week, which was absolutely excruciating to have to wait a week to find out, if your child is going to live or die. And so through the heartbreak and through the tears, we proclaimed life for our child, and we believed in God that God would save her life. And about a week passed, and I went to the emergency room because I was having severe cramping, and we learned there that our child had passed away. I can't describe how painful that season of my life was, to be on the high of mountaintops and to come crashing with that news just within a couple weeks. It truly was. It was such a sad and dark time in my life. So the months passed, and, I continued to grieve my child naturally, and, I asked in my heart why God would give us this child only to take her away so quickly, and I struggled with that. And I never really struggle with who God is. I know that He's, His loving kindness is better than life. I know that He loves me. I know that He has a greater plan, but I still couldn't understand why this precious child had to come and then be gone, so quickly. And so we just kind of went through the motions, and then fast forward to, well, almost nearly to a year from my loss. And one day I was driving down the freeway, and I had this pain in my chest, and I felt like I was going to faint, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. And with that, of course, I went to the emergency room. I do have a history of having an enlarged aorta because I have Marfan syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder that does cause aneurysm in the heart. But I had been followed for that for a long time. So having regular CT scans was normal for me, and there was never any significant growth at all. My heart was pretty stable, and it had been stable for the last, for essentially my whole life, but it had been stable. Well, apparently this new CT scan that I had done showed a significant growth of my aortic root, to the point where local doctors told me that I needed to evaluate with my Stanford cardiologist as soon as possible. So I did send those CT scan results over to them over at Stanford, and needed to come in for an appointment right away, and was advised that I needed to have, urgent open heart surgery to replace essentially part of my aorta so that it wouldn't rupture. So on July 23rd, 2023, at nearly, I guess, a year and a week after losing our child, we drove down to Stanford and prepared for my open heart surgery. I still didn't know at the time how serious my growth was, really, and how the pregnancy would have impacted my ability to be here today. My aorta had become dangerously enlarged, and after my surgeon at Stanford opened my chest and saw it for himself, he told me something that I will never forget. He said my aorta was paper thin, at risk of tearing, at risk of dissecting, and at risk of taking my life without warning. So they replaced my aortic root and most of my ascending aorta as well. And afterward, I really began to understand something about the baby I had lost a year earlier. Pregnancy places enormous additional demands on a woman's cardiovascular system. And had that pregnancy continued while my aorta was becoming so dangerously fragile, the physical stress of carrying that baby could have put my life in grave danger. So suddenly, I had to look back at the prayer I thought God hadn't answered, because maybe He had answered it, just not in the way I would have understood at the time. I had spent a year grieving the child I thought that God hadn't saved, without realizing that God may have been saving me. There are mysteries belonging to God that I don't pretend to understand, but I know what happened in my story. June 2022, I discovered I was pregnant, and in July 2022, I lost my baby. And almost exactly 1 year later, in July of 2023, doctors discovered that my aorta had grown at an alarming rate and that I needed emergency surgery. And when my surgeon saw it, it was paper thin. There are moments when I think about the timing of all of this, and it overwhelms me, because for an entire year, I really thought July represented the month that God had allowed something precious to be taken from me. 1 year later, July became the month my own life was spared. And that changed the way I understand suffering, because sometimes we are standing in the middle of a tragedy and we're screaming, God, why? And God doesn't give us the answer. Not that day, maybe not that month, maybe not even that year. We see one moment, but God sees the whole road. And sometimes the thing we are begging Him to change may be connected to something we can't possibly see yet. So this isn't just the story of my miscarriage, and it isn't just a story about my open heart surgery. It's the story of what happened when the two most painful chapters of my life collided, and I finally looked backward and realized that God had been there the entire time.